Hey everybody, Dr. Hasanalu. How's it going? I would like to begin by just sort of taking stock of where we are with the class. And I'll say that I did look again at the analytics for the first two videos and compared them to the quiz scores. And, it seems like a fair amount of you are just trying to wing it, which, is fine to a point, but I think, because there's such a small amount of people in here that it becomes, it behooves me as someone who wants to teach this class to see what I can do to get at least most of you to be on board with watching these videos. So, in other words, it, it seems like four or five of you are not even watching the videos. And if I was in a class of, you know, 35 students, that would probably be acceptable. But given that that's close to half the class, that's, makes it so that this is not really a functioning class. So we'll see how it goes. I'll see how this next quiz goes. And if I need to change it up in some other way where I sort of have a kind of mandatory way of making sure that you watch the videos and I check in to see who in particular is watching them. I have a sense of who is versus who isn't. I will. But the solution is just for everybody to buckle down and get through these things so that we have a functioning class, because otherwise there's, like I said, there's no point in me putting in a lot of energy into them if no one's going to watch them. And so, like I said, if that trend continues, I'll find some other way to ensure that people are doing the bare minimum to excel in the class, whether it just be some sort of write up on the video itself. Maybe I do that in addition to the reading analysis, something that wouldn't be difficult for you to do. Maybe I have it so that you send me screenshots of your notes. Okay, so I'm not trying to add unnecessary work to what you know you already have to do for the class, but we do need to do something to make sure that more of you in this small amount of people are doing the work of going through the basic content for the course. So yeah, I'll see. Like I said, I was a little encouraged in the sense that I think a viewership, for lack of a better term, went up for the second video, but it's just not clearly where it needs to be for all the class. And so, maybe some of you need to drop the class too if you're not able to handle the workload. I don't know, given your situation, if it's a lot of work or a little amount of work. The other thing to say is, the quizzes are designed to be like super straightforward. So if you are someone who is in fact doing the work of watching these videos, and you are not getting at least a 90 or maybe an 80%, but I would say 80, 90, or 100%. If you're not getting that and you're doing the work, you should definitely email me, because there's zero reason why that should be happening. That's and I will help you, and I will, we'll figure out what's going on, and we'll make sure that you get on track with these quizzes, because they're supposed to be, pretty straightforward. Okay, and same goes. I mean, I've talked with a couple of other people. Same goes for any other aspect of the course. If at any point any of you are concerned about your performance and you want to ensure that you do better, especially on the final, which is coming up obviously at the end. Just reach out to me, email me. I met with a couple of you, and I'm happy to meet with others. Okay, so that takes care of the sort of check-in stuff with respect to the course. I hope everybody's enjoying their summer, and I think this unit is all too timely, all too recent for a recent moral issues class, given what happened in Uvalde recently, and Buffalo before that. And this is recorded on June 7th, 2022. There were 18 mass shootings over this past weekend alone. Okay. And mass shootings are defined in this case as shootings involving 4 or more people, not including the shooter, where four or more people were either injured or killed. Okay? And so this is a serious problem. And we're sort of stuck in this similar issue with respect to abortion, where I am trying to figure out how to do a class in a kind of one-sided way, where that just means one-sided in the sense that it's not a discussion-based class, which is not my usual way of doing things. And so I have to choose how to frame things. I will say that I'm just going to assume that mass shootings and the amount of mass shootings is a problem. It is an unprecedented problem, or at least what I mean by that is rather a unique problem to the United States. There is no other country that has anything even remotely close to the amount of gun violence that we have here. And it's a sort of public health issue similar to COVID in that respect. And it's one that is unique to this country. It needs to be solved. That's what I'm assuming. You should know, though, that is controversial, unfortunately. 44% of Republicans in a recent poll have said that mass shootings are something that we have to live with in order to protect our freedom, as they put it in the poll. Okay, now that's 44% of Republicans. That's not the majority of the country. Most people are independents, which means they don't identify with any one particular party. Among independents, it's something like 70-80%. I don't know off the top of my head. It's somewhere in there. Think that gun violence and mass shootings is a problem that the government could do something about. And it's somewhere about that 80% with respect to Democrats. So, yeah, I mean, it is controversial, I guess, that mass shootings, and having the school children die. It is controversial, I guess, that's something that we should be addressing. But I'm going to assume that that's not controversial for the purposes of this video. I'm going to assume that I'm talking to someone who agrees that the disproportionate, uniquely American amount of mass shootings going on is a problem. Okay? Now, when you do have that as a starting point, when you agree that something is a problem, you do get controversies from there, which is, it's a controversy regarding how to solve it. Okay, so you can have sincere, intelligent, well-meaning people who all agree on the existence of a problem, like the amount of gun violence in America right now, but who disagree, sincere, intelligent, and well-meaning though they all are, regarding how to solve it. Okay, and I do think that there is a legitimate controversy there, in the sense that when you look at sort of like, you can hear different solutions, different proposed solutions for addressing the problem of gun violence in America, and it's not obvious, just logically speaking, what the right answer is. I do think that's true to a certain extent with respect to this issue. How exactly to go about curbing gun violence is a tricky matter. Okay? And, one of the things I hope that this unit does in the short amount of time that we're going to talk about this is it gets you thinking about which solutions you think are the right ones. You personally, your point of view, which solutions you think are the right ones. And you think logically about that, so that you have a perspective on your proposed solution that hopefully you can advocate for, and you can know how and why you think what you do, and you can proceed accordingly as you see fit, right? But what I thought I would do today, and this sort of synthesizes a lot of what Hugh LaFollette said in the article I had you read. What I thought I would do today is do a kind of a negative project. Negative means I'm going to show that the arguments that you often hear for why gun control is a bad thing, they are not good arguments, and so then it's called negative, because it's got I'm trying to show that something is not the case. So what I'm going to do, in other words, is show you why a lot of the arguments you hear for why there shouldn't be gun control, they are flawed in a logical sense. That's what I'm going to try to do. Okay, and yes, I'll just keep saying this every time. I don't pretend to be a god on this stuff. I hope that you disagree with me, and you're free to disagree with me on this. And the point of this is not to shove anything down your throat. It's to get you to think about it on your own. And so if you think I'm wrong here, and you think the logic is there, then that's fine. All I would ask is that you approach it in a sort of good faith, in a good faith manner, where you think about this issue and think about why I'm wrong in a way that is based in reality. Okay? So if you disagree with anything that I said, that's great. I just would want to know the facts that you have in support of what you're saying. Okay? But to that end, what I'm going to try to do is show you why. I'm going to argue, for whatever that's ultimately worth, for why those facts aren't there when it comes to folks who want to limit gun control. Okay, and we'll sort of go through those arguments, a lot of them, some of the better ones maybe, better sounding ones anyway, and in passing I'll go through some of the just ridiculous ones, which you also hear. Okay, and you'll be able to see why they're ridiculous. Okay, so that's the goal, is to perform that negative task of showing why the arguments that you hear against gun control aren't there. And just keep in mind that even if you think that, there's still a controversial issue about how to actually solve this issue. Okay, and I leave it to you to think that through. All right, with that, let's just go right out of the gate with the Second Amendment defense. you will oftentimes hear that gun control is a bad idea because it infringes upon Second Amendment rights. So what is flawed about this argument? I hope it's just somewhat obvious, honestly, but I'll articulate it in an explicit way to make it obvious. Okay. The first is that it's at best a stretch to say that the Second Amendment, as written, supports private ownership of guns. Okay. Read the Second Amendment. It says that you have the right to bear arms in the name of a well-regulated militia. Okay. So it was about having arms to have state militias, for example, and to build those kinds of organizations. And that was the whole point of that amendment. Okay? The Second Amendment, as written, had nothing to do with private ownership. Okay. Now, just a little bit of context, and this sort of does fit with the theme of the previous unit regarding the rollback of Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court, which is very, very conservative, and that's why Roe v. Wade is very likely going to be overturned, also has interpreted the Second Amendment very recently only in a way that supports this sort of mistaken view. Okay? And the lesson there is that the Supreme Court is just an obviously partisan body, which that's always been true. So I don't think this undermines what I'm saying, in other words. You might say, well, shouldn't we trust the Supreme Court? And if they say it, it goes. I mean, yeah, you can do that only if you're very naive about what the Supreme Court is actually like. Okay? The Supreme Court is a partisan body. They're appointed by Democratic or Republican presidents and confirmed by Democratic or Republican Congress members, right, who do so, confirming this or that person because they fit their particular ideology. Okay, so with that in mind, given the conservative ideology of the court recently, okay, fairly recently and increasingly so since 2016, in 2008 there was the Heller decision, and in that decision it was explicitly stated that the Second Amendment did relate to private gun ownership. So they made explicit that it was about, say, owning a gun in your house, say, to protect yourself, rather than a regulated militia. So it was sort of made explicit then. And same goes for in 2010 with the McDonald decision with respect to handguns. It was similarly said that these Second Amendment rights related to private ownership, and the court sort of made that explicit in those decisions. Okay, so only very recently has it been interpreted explicitly to be about private ownership. But reading the actual amendment as written, it has nothing to do with that. It has something to do with the regulating a militia. And there's also, just so you know, an upcoming decision. This is going to be among the slate of decisions to come, where it's predicted that they are going to further expand the interpretation in question to allow for concealed carry. Now, the decision here, the Bruin decision, is one that is related to New York state law in particular. About someone challenged the idea that you need to go through a whole bunch of licensing requirements in order to carry a concealed handgun in New York. And the Supreme Court's going to rule on that decision. Now, they could rule very narrowly and say something only about New York, or, depending on how they word their decision, they could rule very broadly in a way that has implications for how to interpret the Second Amendment for the country as a whole. So, and all I'm saying right now is that this Supreme Court will be ruling on this decision, and by all accounts, it's going to expand rather than restrict gun rights And so for gun control advocates, it's going to be a step backwards rather than a step forwards, and that's coming up. Okay? Now, so that's why just the explicit text is why interpreting that way is a stretch, and I'm not contradicting myself when I mention that these courts interpret them otherwise, because it just goes to show that the Supreme Court is a partisan body, which it always has been. Okay. So now, and LaFollette's pretty good about this. Even if, you could interpret it clearly, and even if it said the Second Amendment, even if it said people should own guns, people have a right to private ownership, the idea that it has relevance should just boggle your mind. I'm sorry. If anybody says to you that the reason why we should be doing things now in 2022 is because of the way that a document that was written in the late 18th century and what it means says, is, I'm sorry, just kind of a lunatic. And I hope you understand why. The idea that the way things were in the late 18th century has any relevance to now, prior to, or I should say, given that everything that's happened in between then. Do you realize how difficult it was to fire a gun when this was written? You had to load a musket, right? And then you had to put the powder in, pound it down, all right? And then it took about, 30 seconds to a minute to reload it, okay? And then fire it again. They were talking about and I guess they had cannons, right? Okay. They were talking about that kind of stuff when they said the right to bear arms. They were not talking about the AR-15 that was recently used to murder 22 people in Uvalde. Okay? That's just one example of how this is just nutty to someone that says the way that we should do things now, I'm going to use as my evidence the way that a document that was written more than a couple hundred years ago, and I'm going to use that as my argument. I mean, can you imagine making a medical decision now based on the knowledge of medicine in the late 18th century? I hope you wouldn't do that. And the reason why is you'd say, well, we've kind of moved on, and we've learned, and a lot of things have changed, and we've learned a few things between now and then. And so that's why maybe we should rely on some other piece of evidence. Okay? But, okay. I hope that that's just obvious. But I just want to be clear. If that sounds obvious to you, you should be on guard for the so-called originalists who claim to think that they actually believe that we should be interpreting it in its original way. If you look at how they actually operate, they're not stupid. They don't actually believe that. They just use that as a cover to get what they really want across. And they interpret things in the quote-unquote original way and fail to interpret it as they see fit to get their more partisan aims across. Okay, but yeah, on its face, it's just ridiculously stupid, to rely on something like that because of the obvious way in which things have changed over the last couple of hundred years. Okay, and so, that's just one example, though, of many, right, that illustrates that even if we have a law that says we must rely on the Constitution, and we do, that doesn't mean we should from a moral standpoint. The Founding Fathers had the whole idea of amendments precisely for this reason. The Constitution is a living document, as they put it, where the whole idea was we should be allowed to amend it as times change. Okay, and then so the point is, right, once you recognize the difference between legality and morality, you're not going to say, well, because the Constitution says it's okay to bear arms, let's just assume for the sake of argument, because the Constitution says it, that makes it okay. The Constitution said that black people were 2/3 of a person. All right, sorry, 3/5 of a person. Got that wrong. The 3/5 compromise. Should we, because it was in the Constitution, should we be allowing black people that kind of representation? Or do you think things have moved on? Okay. And so it goes, right? Now, I want to just air one last little bit here before we move on about the sort of idea that gun ownership is a matter of freedom, which you will oftentimes hear. Okay. People say things like the Second Amendment is a matter of freedom. I mean, this is of a piece with, not getting a vaccine is a matter of freedom. Not wearing a mask is a matter of freedom. This idea that you are free to do things that put other people in danger is also ridiculous, just so you know. It's not that difficult to understand why this is ridiculous, though, right? You are free to do what you want. Of course, you should be allowed to be able to do what you want, express yourself, for example, as long as what? You're not harming other people. Okay, so you are not free to do anything that puts other people in harm's way. By the way, you are free on the proper understanding of this logic to put yourself in harm's way as long as you know the risks and you know what you're getting into. For example, ride a motorcycle without a helmet, let's say, right? You're putting yourself in danger. That's about it, right? If you know what you're getting into, you should be allowed to do that. Okay. But driving that same motorcycle drunk, that's a no-no. Why? Because you're not free to do that. Why? Because when you choose to do that, you choose to put other people in harm's way. All right? And you therefore infringe upon their freedom because the person walking down the sidewalk did not want to be hit by that car or that motorcycle, let's say. Okay? Same goes with all of the stuff about anti-vaccines and anti-masks. If not getting vaccinated and not wearing a mask were such that it only affected you, then of course it would be a matter of freedom. But the point is, right, it's just like drunk driving. If you go unvaccinated and harm other people, including some of your older loved ones, right, or some stranger that you don't know, some stranger that is in the same building as you, with a club that you're in, right, and you put them in harm's way against their will, right, then that's a case where freedom, quote unquote, is not a good thing and should not be allowed. Okay, so protecting freedoms, everyone agrees with that. For example, free speech, but it has limits, and this is what LaFollette talks about, right? Precisely when the freedoms that you have infringe upon other people's safety against their will. You're not allowed to yell fire in a theater, as the famous expression goes, but the idea is we can uphold an understanding of free speech in light of that. Okay. So how does that work for guns? I don't think it's necessarily true that you cannot own a gun if we were operating with this idea, right? That freedom must have limitations because you can't be allowed to put other people in harm's way. I don't think that rules out, and LaFollette's good about getting this out as well, right? I don't think that rules out owning a gun, but we should not be able to get guns as easily as we now do, or now are, right? You should have to clear a very high bar that shows that you are responsible, so that you can own a gun, but we know that we can trust you with that gun so that when you operate it, you will operate it responsibly in a way that does not put, say, the family members in your home in danger or people on the street that you disagree with. We have to know that you're not going to use your gun in that kind of way that puts other people in danger. So there'd have to be some sort of competency test for it, right? That would make it so that we would only give you a gun if we were sure that you were responsible enough and that you wouldn't use it in a way that put other people in harm's way. If you cleared that bar and you showed that you were responsible, then yeah, maybe you could own a gun, right? But the idea that we should just make guns as available as they now are, which is just ridiculous. I mean, the shooter in Uvalde bought that AR-15 on his 18th birthday, the day he was able to, and got it, and hundreds of rounds of ammunition before carrying out those horrific acts. Right? Shouldn't be that easy. That the bar that you need to clear right now is not high. So if you want to use the freedom defense, you can, but the only way to make sense of that is that you have to prove that you are responsible. And I mean, think about driving just as another example, right? We don't just give people driver's licenses. They have to prove that they are responsible. They have to pass a driving test. Why? Because that car that you get behind is essentially a big steel weapon, right? You can kill people in that thing. And so we recognize that you can't just let anybody drive, only the people that are responsible. But that's not how our country works with guns. It's very easy to get a gun. It's much harder to get your license. And so that's where the freedom defense falls through, is that it's only a matter of freedom if you're not putting other people in harm's way. And so the only way that could work is if we had a lot more gun legislation and gun control than we now do. Okay, so the freedom defense does not work to support the way things are now. Okay, hope that's clear. All right, so now you get the argument about self-defense. All right, and what are the problems with that argument? So, and LaFollette was not good on this. I felt like, in that middle section of the reading, he went a long way of saying something that could have been said much quicker. And so I'm going to try to distill part of what he was saying in a way that I think gets at the issue. Because you hear people say, well, I have a right to defend myself. Yes, everyone has a right to defend themselves. So the question is not, does everyone have a right to defend themselves? The question is, does that mean that they have a right to own a gun? That's the issue. And he talks about this in the beginning when he talks about the derivative right. Okay? So now let's show why the argument that owning a gun is of a piece with self-defense is flawed, because I think it is also flawed. Okay? A lot of it hinges on the fact that the idea that it is a good thing is a matter of weighing the sort of good against the bad of owning a gun. Okay, so if you want to summarize the issue with the argument, is that if you want to defend yourself with a gun, there's a lot of good things about owning a gun, right, that are contrasted with a lot of bad things about owning a gun. And the issue is, given that mixture of good and bad, you can't really make the case that the good outweighs the bad. So that's the problem with this argument. So let me say that a little bit more carefully. Okay? So what are the benefits? What is the good things about owning the gun? And he talks about it. It may deter some crimes. There's really not a lot of evidence to actually show that it does. And he does a good job of explaining why. I mean, the logic of it is clear. If a criminal is somebody who thinks, well, if I go into that house, I might get shot, then the criminal is going to say, well, I'm not going to go into that house. Okay, and so then if they were going to rob them otherwise, then it deters them from robbing them. I mean, okay. The trickiness of that and the problem with that is that it treats criminals as rational actors. Okay, I mean, it's the same logic behind capital punishment being a deterrent. If criminals were rational, right, then capital punishment would deter them from murder because they'd say, I don't want to die. But it's been shown that capital punishment does not deter crime. Okay, so why? I mean, the short answer is criminals are not rational. Okay, when people do the things like commit crimes, it's not the result of a rational decision where they're thinking clearly about, well, if I do this, then that, and I do this, then that. That's not the sort of sociology and the psychology of that kind of behavior. That's the short answer. But okay, I mean, you get the basic logic. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it deters crimes and it allows you to protect yourself, right? It saves your family's life. It's also sort of used for enjoyment. This is sort of aside from self-defense, but I thought it was worth putting in there. Hunting can be a wonderful sport. Okay, so that's a benefit, right? It's guns that are used for sports like hunting. Okay, let's just call that a good. Okay. The harms, though, right, should be obvious. I mean, all of the violence going on. Like I said, 18 mass shootings just this last weekend. The biggest killer, the biggest form of gun death is suicide. I think the latest figures I looked at, it's like averages 25,000 people die a year through suicide by way of a gun. All right. So the guns make suicide much easier, right? You can't do it through pills or hanging yourself or other means, right? And it's been shown that a lot of times when people do it through those other means, they fail, and then it amounts to a kind of cry for help, and then they get help and they live. Okay? Whereas it's much easier to do it right the first time with a gun. And so a lot of people do it that way, and it ends up successfully killing them. It makes it easier for them to kill themselves. That's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. It makes it easier for the bad guy with the gun to kill if they have an AR-15, okay, or a handgun with however many rounds it has in it, right? So guns don't kill people, people kill people, but what guns do is they allow people to kill people more easily, and that's a bad thing. Okay, so now let's imagine this. We have the pros, which are the benefits, and we have the cons, which are the harms that I mentioned, right? Do the benefits outweigh the harms? I want you to just recognize that that is at best, and I'm trying to be as nice as possible to this argument, at best that's entirely subjective. At best that's entirely subjective. Does the good outweigh the bad? There's no objective way to answer that question at best. Okay? Why? Because it's like a risk, similar to a kind of a risk-reward assessment. Well, imagine you had a gun, right? Well, I might, make it so that my kid gets the gun and hurts themselves, or someone in my family who's suffering from depression kills themselves. But I could deter some crimes and protect my family, let's assume. You make that calculation. I bet if I went around the class, some of you would say to yourself, okay, it's worth it to have a gun, given that calculation. And some of you in this class would say it's not worth it to have a gun. Is there a right or wrong answer to there? If two of you had different views on that, is there a right or wrong answer there? No, there isn't. There isn't. Now, why does that make it problematic? Now, again, so this kind of goes back to the whole freedom defense thing. Okay? Look, if it was just about you and what you wanted to do, then you could make that subjective decision and it would only affect you, and that wouldn't be a problem. Let me use an example that I was using in these contexts. It's sort of fitting, but I don't oftentimes use it to talk about gun control. But suppose you wanted to play Russian roulette, right? And you know what that is. So, but let's suppose it's like with a big gun and there's 100 chambers for bullets, right? And there's one bullet, okay, in that chamber, and then you turn the barrel, and okay, and that's Russian roulette. And it's so now, how many of you would do that? How many of you would play Russian roulette just for shits and giggles? I don't know. Maybe there's somebody in here who would. But how many of you would play Russian roulette? Okay, you got a 99% chance of living Okay, because there's 99 open chambers and only one filled chamber of the bullet with the bullet in it. How many of you would play Russian roulette if, as long as you survived, you got $1 million? I bet some of you would. I bet some of you wouldn't, though. Okay, maybe $100,000. I bet some of you would. I bet some of you wouldn't. So that's where some of you weigh the risks, death, against the benefits, $100,000, $1 million, and you say, it's not worth it. Some of you say it is. Okay. There's different answers there. There's no right or wrong answer there. I hope you realize. But okay, but the point would be, as long as you're the only one affected by it, you're the only one playing Russian roulette and you get the money, hey, that's fine. You can make that choice for yourself. But the problem, right, is that you're owning a gun and there's the people in your house that are going to get hurt, right? There's the people who are going to be killed by the one who gets the AR-15 sold to them on the 18th birthday. Okay? It's not just about the individual person making the choice. It's about affecting other people's lives against their will. And that's why it's a problematic judgment, right? You might have a right to decide to play Russian roulette for shits and giggles, right? If you're particularly daring, but you do not have the right to make other people play Russian roulette. You get the idea? Okay, and that's the same thing with respect to the vaccines and the mask stuff and drunk driving. All of this, and the freedom thing I was mentioning before. You are not free to put other people in harm's way. And so if it's a subjective judgment, that's the problem with it, is you're basing a decision that it's only got a subjective basis, okay, and you're using that in a way that affects other people's lives against their will. And so that's why it's problematic. Okay, and that's in the best case. I just want to be clear. In the worst case, it's just false to say that the good outweighs the bad. Why? Because in the worst case, maybe we could find ways of deterring crime, other forms of enjoyment, other ways of protecting your family that didn't put other people in harm's way. You know what a lot of people commit crimes for? Because they have they come from poverty, for example. So maybe we could address poverty in the country, right, as a way of deterring crime, for example. Most people are not just like, I'm bored, so I'm going to go rob somebody's house. A lot of times people are saying, well, either I rob somebody's house or I starve, and I have to make this decision. And then with their backs against the wall, they do that. I'm not necessarily justifying it, but I am explaining it. And I'm just pointing out that there are other ways to deter crime other than to allow everybody to have a gun. Okay? And so then the idea would be, if we could figure out ways to deter crime in other means and defend your family through other means, then we would have all of the benefits that these folks want with gun ownership and none of the harms, ideally, right? Okay, so in that case, it would just be completely false to say that the goods outweigh the bad. Okay, that's the idea. Now, I just want to do a little bit of time talking about just some of the more nutty things that you hear in the discourse these days. Okay, I can't help myself partly, but partly this is just so that you sort of know what folks are saying out there and just how ridiculous it is, how ridiculous the discourse is, and how ridiculous the discourse has become, so that you're aware of it, so that you're aware of the kind of intellectual climate we have in America these days, which is a scary one, okay, given some of the things that people are saying with apparently straight faces. Okay, so one is, and people say this with a straight face, that they should be allowed to have a gun so that they can protect themselves against government tyranny. Are these people aware of what the U.S. military is like, for example? Okay. No matter what kind of guns you have, you're not going to be able to stop the military from either killing you if they wanted to, bombing you if they wanted to, or if they could do it, taking you and detaining you and putting you in prison if they wanted to. Okay? You're not going to be able to stop that. That's obvious. The amount of government firepower that would be used against you, no matter what kind of guns you had, is sort of clear that you're not going to be able to stop it. And if the idea is, well, then let's let them arm themselves to the teeth even more so that they could actually mount a defense against the government, do I need to tell you how freaking crazy that is? They would have to get, like, should we allow private citizens to have grenade launchers? Should we allow private citizens to have nuclear weapons and things like that? No, we shouldn't. I hope you realize that we shouldn't, for these reasons, right? Because of what that would do for making people more easily killed. I hope you realize that, okay? So this is just a kind of a stupid thing to say. Sorry, it just is. But you hear it all the time. Have those people thought it through? Like what are you going to do? Are you going to get into like a standoff with them where you have like a compound and then you fend off the government until when? Are you going to like just fend them off indefinitely? You're going to create your own little country wherever you are? Are you going to grow your own food and have your own water and just live in a way that protects this tiny little community from the government indefinitely? Is that what would happen in the best case scenario? This is just insane. These people that say this stuff. This is just insane. Okay? You just need to know that it's insane. And it's very common, unfortunately. Same with the other proposed solutions. I don't know if you have been, I hope for your own sanity you have not been following the discourse lately, but the people who want to protect, say, the ability to buy an AR-15 right now, some of the things that they are saying to prevent school shootings, one of the things, and people say this with a straight face, is we're going to reverse outfit all of the schools so that they have only one entrance. That's one thing people are saying. Arm teachers. That's what people are saying. Okay. We're going to arm the teachers where, if you know anything about the Uvalde case, right? The Uvalde, that town, 40% of its budget goes to the police. They were a paramilitary group, if ever there was one. They had all of the guns, all of the body armor you would want. Okay? And they were frightened of this shooter. They couldn't do it. But we're going to arm teachers, and then we're going to train them to do it when we can't get the police in this case to do it. That's nutty. Okay? The idea that you stop a bad guy with a gun with a good guy with a gun, that comes from the NRA. It was part of their initial response to some of the mass shootings. Okay, the Uvalde shows why that argument is flawed, because there was a whole bunch of good guys with the gun, and they didn't do it. They didn't stop it. Okay, so there's clearly issues with that solution. They had a officer on site. This is another thing that you hear. You hear people say, well, we need to have police officers on site. I'm sure a lot of you did at your school, right? There was a police officer on site on the Uvalde, or at I forget the name of the elementary school. There was one on site. Okay, there was one at Parkland. Okay, so they don't stop the crimes. They don't stop it, and they also cause a whole bunch of other problems. Because what they do is they police the students for other things, and the school relies on them for discipline in some cases. There's some good studies, good work on this recently. So the police officer on site defense isn't going to work. The one entrance thing, we're just going to make schools into prisons. So we're going to, rather than get rid of AR-15s and ban them, we're going to allow AR-15s and we're going to protect the schools. Do we need to point out that there are mass shootings in other places? Okay, so are we going to have one entrance into all buildings? Is every building whatsoever going to be the equivalent of a maximum security prison? Is that the thinking? Okay. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of ridiculous things being said out there. And so I think, I just wanted to use this as an opportunity for you to be aware of some of that discourse. Okay. And lastly, this is another one that you oftentimes hear, is it's and he talks about this. It's not a matter of guns. It's because of our violent culture. That's why there are so many mass shootings, right? And that's why. And so it's not really a matter of guns at all. Okay. So part of this is part of the problem with this. It goes back to the stuff that I was talking about this. Yes, I get it. Everyone gets it. Guns do not kill people. People kill people. What guns do is they make it easier to kill people. I mean, nuclear weapons don't kill people. People kill people. Okay, that's, if you use that logic, I hope we all agree that we shouldn't allow people to have nuclear weapons. Why? Because even though people kill people, a nuclear weapon would allow a person to kill somebody much easier. LaFollette talks about this pretty well. Uses, I think, the grenade launcher. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but he mentions this. Okay, so the idea is that even, what I'm trying to say here is, even if we had a violent culture, that's not an argument for why we should allow guns, because then a violent culture with guns flooding it is one that makes violence more dangerous, the violent behavior more dangerous. Okay, so that's the sort of first response to that. But oftentimes this is just code for racism, right? When people say it's a culture issue, I mean, it's the same reason why they think of, poverty among black people. Crime among black people is oftentimes said, quote unquote, a culture issue. They talk about, single African American mothers and the black fathers, right? And there's all these racist tropes about black people where the idea is the reason why, say, they're disproportionately in prisons is because of their quote unquote culture. Sort of blatantly and obviously racist. I hope you see that. Okay. And so a lot of times, anytime you hear that word culture, it's code for that. It's the idea as well. It's just the violent nature of, say, black people. That's where violence comes. Black on black crime in inner cities, gang violence is the result, right, of that culture. Okay. So again, code for racism. The way that you address it is you address the socioeconomic problems of people of color, and then you see, of course, that when you give, say, black people and other people of color the same sort of starting point that white people in, say, more suburban areas tend to get, they tend to not be as violent. Okay, and if you have a white person who grows up in an inner city and is faced with those same sorts of social pressures, they tend to be as violent. Okay, so that out of the gate, that's one response to the sort of culture issue, and the other thing is that it's sort of irrelevant, because even though it is maybe true that we have a violent culture, that is obviously a function of our laws. Culture is determined by laws. One of the ways that you would change a violent culture is by making laws that make it thereby less violent. I mean, we had a very sexist culture prior to the women's liberation movement, right? Now we have a less sexist culture, to be sure, right? And the idea would be, what happened was we had some brave people who changed those laws, and then people grew up in the 70s, 80s under those laws, and as a result of growing up under those laws, the culture itself shifted. So that's the same thing that could go on here with proper gun laws, okay? And now, a sort of way of making a different but related point that he does get into, and I think it's interesting, is, well, but what about our gun culture, and what would that do to something like, say, prohibiting guns, right? Because we have such a deep-seated gun culture, right? You wonder whether we could, as a culture, withstand, taking away AR-15s, like confiscating them. We tried to confiscate alcohol, for example, and that didn't work, right? We had to repeal that law, okay? And so the argument would be, because of our gun culture, right, prohibiting guns wouldn't work. Now that may or may not be true. I think this is nice to end on, because it does speak towards the complicated issue of how to solve this problem, right? Maybe confiscating AR-15s isn't the answer because of this point. Maybe it would backfire. But I just want to be clear that if it is true, it gives lie to all of these other arguments. It shows why they're BS. Because what it does is it shows that what really is going on is people love their guns, and they don't want their guns taken away from them, right? And the idea would be, we have built into our culture that guns, that they need their guns, right? I mean, this, right? I mean, there's a fetish with guns in certain areas and by certain people in this culture, in our culture. There are. I mean, gun purchases, it's famously more guns in this country than people, and they have skyrocketed. Gun purchases have skyrocketed over the last 20 years, and they do, by the way, after every mass shooting, sort of interestingly. But it's been shown that it's not because more people are buying guns, it's the same people buying more guns. And so the argument would be, if the gun culture would backfire, would make it so that prohibition would backfire, then that just shows why the reason why folks have these guns is not because they see it as a sort of a rational thing. It's that they have, like I said, like a gun fetish. And so it's because people are sort of so irrationally attached to their guns that prohibition wouldn't work. That's the argument there. I hope that makes sense. Okay. All right. So hope that all is clear, and we'll keep rolling. Like I said, I'll be on the lookout for how folks are taking in this material, and I might have to adjust things accordingly. But if you're someone who's watching the videos, you should be, and you're doing the minimum work, you shouldn't be worried about that, because it'll be just something very straightforward. But I need to do something to ensure that the class is, functioning in a proper sense, as opposed to having half of you, not watch the videos and try to wing it. Okay, I hope that that's clear. I'm not angry about it at all. It's just a matter of me trying to do my job in a way that makes sense. All right, please let me know if you have any questions. Take care.